Good morning, fellas. Notice the mornings are getting darker. Well, it's light out right now. Sandra and I had a discussion at dinner last night. So when we go back to, are we going back to normal time?
Yes. Well, November, or I think first week of November somewhere.
Okay, thanks, Bill. I get
I was saying,
confused.
I was thinking the utility peak time periods. This is winter peak for utilities. So if you want to use off-peak
Well,
power,
you're the right guy to have on this Zoom call, that's for sure.
yeah,
So when that happens, the mornings tend to go brighter and the daylight and the evening goes darker quicker, right?
well, spring ahead, fall back. So instead of being at 7 o'clock, it would be 6 o'clock.
Yeah. Yeah, after all these years, I should have that figured out. I think I generally do, but on the moment, and since
Me too.
this is so critical, it's being recorded. We want to make we don't want to be talking about erroneous stuff here. So
Yeah.
anyway, that is totally beside the point. We're in John, the Gospel of John, and today is the last few verses in chapter 18, and we'll of course next week we'll pick up with chapter 19, 1 through 4, 4 verses next week. So let's dive into this this morning as we look about this whole subject of pressure. Pressure is something we all started to learn about in probably junior high science, but it's something we all experience. We sometimes label it as stress, but let's look at the subject of pressure. The text reads, however, Pilate, it's in the middle of a sentence, and Pilate is speaking. However, you folks, you Jewish folks in the crowd, have a custom that I, being the one in power, release one prisoner for you at the Passover. Now, he's diving into a Jewish custom that was evidently happening at that time. Therefore, do you wish that I release for you the King of the Jews? That would be Jesus. So they shouted again, saying, that's the crowd, not this man, but Barabbas. Um, Now, Barabbas was a rebel. That is John's account of this interaction. Let's dive into this. In our text, Pilate proposes something to the crowd, is his proposal. Now, there's a lot behind this that we're going to look at. And his proposal is basically, hey, crowd, what do you think about this idea? And so, generically, to propose anything, we're in the world of proposal. And when anything is proposed, it's to make the suggestion of a joint way forward, the parties of the proposal. And there are numerous reasons for this joint way forward. The way forward is unclear, whatever that is within the context, and a proposal is given to maybe bring the group together to move forward together. That is, in a very broad sense, the idea of proposal, of a way forward. In this particular instance, Pilate's proposal to the crowd is a demonstration of what we people tend to do while experiencing pressure. And I've got the image of a pressure cooker. It's something you don't see very often today, but I remember walking into my grandma's kitchen, my great aunt, and the pressure cooker was going in the fall, and inside were jars being canned of various things out of the garden. The pressure cooker. And so pressure cooker is where heat is applied, pressure builds and is held inside the container, and that's what a pressure cooker is. And I'd like to suggest today that that is what's happening within these two verses. Let's take a look at this idea. This is the image that I've been using. AI helped me create it, Chat GPT, and I have proposed Pilate dressed in a three-piece business suit in a modern context placed within a historic story. I first dressed him up in his garb, but I thought it would be more apparent of the role he played in at that time for us to be able to identify with it. So this is the image of Pilate that I've created to depict the role in his society at that time. Pilate is clear to all present in this point in the story that after he heard the facts by of different testimony, talking with the accused, Jesus, there are no grounds whatsoever for prosecution. That's in verse 38. We're going to see this repeated numerous times. However, there is another dynamic that's creating pressure, and that's the growing mob energy opposing this verdict. And there's other dynamics happening that is that's opposing what he believes about Jesus, and it's creating the heat is starting to turn up. He's experiencing pressure early on. He has been experiencing pressure. And he's using his mind to figure out, how can I get out of this? I just want relief. And so he makes a false assumption during this time, and he falsely assumes, the crowd is thinking like he is thinking. Maybe we can punish Jesus, present him, which is coming, and maybe the crowd will soften and we can get out of this mess. And the mess is, he is convinced in his mind through personal testimony Jesus is innocent, but the crowd is pushing back on that belief. So in an attempt to relieve his own tension, the pressure cooker, he offers an alternative to the crowd, thinking they will respond favorably towards Jesus. He has a moment of brilliance. Hey, I know what I can do. It's the same kind of thing that I have done numerous times when I'm feeling pressure. And so he proposes this idea that we see in the text itself. In doing so, he's applying the scapegoat mechanism. We've looked at this numerous times within our time together. The scapegoat mechanism, just briefly, is a human device that we use in order to transfer blame to something else in order to relieve the tension. It's a tension or pressure relieving device that we're all aware of, the scapegoat mechanism. So, what's going on? Pilate is trapped. He's trapped by his own plan. Externally, circumstance is creating the context. The heat, he's not controlling the heat of the burner on the pressure cooker. That's happening to him. But I think it's really important to understand to see what he's doing with that. And what he's doing with that is he's self-creating his own narrative under pressure, and that's creating more pressure. That's the point. And he's trapped by his own ego, his own needs. On one hand, Pilate could act in response um, to his verdict. There's nothing holding him back. He's the guy in charge. His verdict is Jesus is innocent. He could stand on his own ruling and he could work through the consequences. Now, the consequences aren't going to be easy, but he could do that. But that is not what we see occur. And we don't see it occur, I think, for a very good reason. And the question is why? And he is now in my imagery. I've now put a pressure cooker, and this is his head. It's going on inside of him deeply. The pressure is being increased because the heat is being increased. And it's because the why is because of how he responds to the pressure of the moment. Point being, we all experience external circumstances that we can't control. But what we see before us is how one man deals with that mounting pressure. And that is the point. He's making it worse. So, what pressure creates? I've got 4 points here that we're going to look at. Pressure, generic pressure, what it does. First of all, pressure, and we all know what this feels like or is like. Pressure shrinks the field of vision. Okay, this is really something I think it's helpful to me. Okay, Pilate believes Jesus is innocent. He's already stated in the text. But that conviction gets overshadowed by the immediate threat of unrest. And indirectly, this is going to be a bigger deal later on. Dave brought this up last week when Pilate becomes extremely afraid. But there's a pushback. There's an innocence and there's a pushback against his verdict. This is happening because when a person feels squeezed, like he feels squeezed, whether by fear, whatever it is, fear, time, threat, or risk, there's numerous external things that can happen. The brain tends to narrow its focus. That's the point. Shrinking of field of vision. Instead of weighing the long-term consequences or holding to a higher value, the mind gravitates towards short-term survival. We go into survival mode. When we're under pressure, we tend towards survival mode, and that shrinks our field of vision. It becomes about just surviving, not what are the ramifications, what are right, what is my instinct telling me. Those don't come into play. Those are overshadowed by short-term survival. And I think that's just part of being human. So the field of vision shrinks, and this thing called cognitive dissonance comes to the forefront. Now, let me define that. That's a technical word, and it means as discomfort of holding two incompatible convictions. It's the discomfort of holding that's the dissonance. Okay, now what's interesting about this is that often tension is between what I know intuitively, what is known, and what is unknown. Things are going on okay in my known world, but what's creating the tension is now this unknown of what's going to happen through this crowd. And that is often the case with cognitive dissonance. I'm moving along, and all of a sudden, my world gets rocked by the unknown, something unknown, and I have to deal with it. And I go on alert because I feel it's threatening me personally. So to go a little bit deeper with this idea of cognitive, which means mind unalignment is the idea. When conscience, and that's the inner compass that urges alignment with truth and justice, that would be exemplified by his testimony. Jesus is innocent. That's his conscience. But yet he's got another factor playing in, survival instinct, and that is to protect himself. He does not want the crowd to riot. That would be really bad for his ego and for his career, and it's gonna play worse later on. But when these two collide, most people experience this cognitive dissonance, this unalignment of these two variables. And it's this dissonance, which is lack of alignment, which requires relief. I mean, I can throw out what I have believed for years about anything if I'm under a sense of survival. I've got to get this thing corrected in my head, and the damage that occur, or the damage that occurs, is sometimes really unfortunate. So he reaches for relief, and there he is now. He's under pressure. His head is a pressure cooker, and he has reached for a valve on the side to relieve some of the pressure. Notice his hand is on the valve, and that is by design. Fingers are pointing to him, and he's feeling the pressure. The scapegoat mechanism becomes the release valve. Now, let's look at this. Psychologically, scapegoating is one common way of reducing the dissonance. If I can just blame you, then I can get the monkey off my back I can release the pressure. I'm trying to release the pressure somehow of this dissonance, this unalignment. If the person can shift the weight, and I could use the word blame there, but it's a weight, it's or pressure. If I can shift the pressure onto someone or something else, they temporarily, I can easily temporarily ease the inner tension there, and that's operated out of survival mode. Now, in our context, it's not so much about survival of life, but it's a perceived survival in some regard. Pilate is experiencing survival of his ego personally, of his role in society, and indirectly at this point, Caesar's rule. For him to have a riot would not look good in regard to his leadership. And so he's under this survival pressure. So Pilate demonstrated the scapegoat mechanism by enacting the known custom of one prisoner relief, and he's doing that as a pressure relief, so he can relieve some of the tension. His attempt was to reframe the situation, control the situation, reframe it in order to avoid facing the uncomfortable choice between conscience and survival. That's the tension. I'm just going to relieve the pressure. I'm going to apply the scapegoat mechanism. If I can get the crowd, he falsely assumes they think like he does. If I can get them to release Jesus, then we can all go home and forget about this. Okay, the meaning for us, and this is number 4. This isn't a Pilate problem. This is a human reality, and that's my point. Okay, this next little statement is super controversial, and I don't mean to be controversial, but most people and commentators read this as Pilate is a bad guy villain. And for much of my Christian experience, I just categorized him on my bookshelf as the villain that sent Jesus to the cross. Well, there is truth to that, but I think in adopting that idea, we're missing the point to a high degree of what this narrative is to be about leading to the cross. I am proposing to you that Pilate, I don't really view it that way. I view he's a villain, but no more than I am in my raw humanness. Pilate is a voyager in this thing we call life. Now, I'll let you take and do with that what you wish. What he's doing is exactly what we people do to each other. Here's my point. For us to adopt Pilate as the villain is to apply, in a sense, the scapegoat mechanism. That he's the bad guy and he's sending the good guy to the cross. I view it a little differently, that yes, Pilate is the instrument, but he's part of humanity, just like I'm part of humanity. And by reading this from a larger perspective, we as humans operate like this, and Pilate is the representative of what we tend to do under pressure. That's how I adopt it. And I think it sets the stage in a, I think it sets the stage for us to understand what the cross is about. Pilate is demonstrating what we as people tend to do to each other. And here's some examples of both directly and indirectly of scapegoating. Blame. What we do with blame, we blame the circumstances of what's happening on or other. We blame circumstances or others instead of facing our internal conflict. Okay, this is how religious people do this. This is how, well, Pilate is doing it, first of all, through the proposal of Barabbas. If I can just get the crowd's anger to shift, if I can propose mercy by the release of Jesus, maybe the crowd will jump on board. No, they chose Barabbas, a rebel, as it says in the text. And you know how we do it is when we're I've done this numerous times in my own relationships, in a disagreement, trying to get my foothold so I can make, shout louder to get my point. Or you're always doing this, blaming the other person. I've been guilty of this numerous times because it's part of being human. And Pilate is demonstrating that for all of us. Or delay, another way is we delay decisions. I'm also really good at this. A pressure decision is in front of me, and I will tend to ignore it or delay it as long as I can, hoping it kind of fixes itself. That's been very much part of my adult life, of just delaying decisions. It'll work out. Sometimes it does, but it's the idea of avoidance because of a discomfortable discomfort at the moment. I play the victim. Here it is. Okay, the victim is, I had no choice. Now, Pilate is going to play the victim in a little bit, but not this week. But what we humans tend to do, meaning for us, is that when I'm under pressure, I advocate any of my human choices, and I say I had no choice. We always have choice. Read Viktor Frankl's book. That is a marvelous masterpiece of this idea of choice under pressure. We say, I have no choice. They made me do it. So I will just assume the role of the doormat. And somehow, in a very twisted way, we humans get comfort out of being a doormat. Because if I can just be a doormat, then I can somehow get comfort in that. So these are ways, these are human realities. And Pilate is demonstrating this through this narrative that we're looking at. When you and I reach for the valve of pressure release, it sometimes reduces the tension. You know, I may use my cleverness to do it, but the unfortunate thing is it sidesteps what the truth is. So the outcome for Pilate, the truth is there is only tragedy when one reaches for the valve of personal relief. Again, there might be an immediate release of tension, but long term, it's really unfortunate. And Pilate knows this very well. He doesn't know it then, but if Pilate is conscious today, he knows this well. Under pressure, the self-generated quick fix rarely aligns with what our conscience, the known, knows to be true. Pilate saves himself from the immediate conflict, but he contributes to an injustice that history has never forgotten. And here's a note. I can remember being raised at First Presbyterian Church on College Avenue and Myrtle Street in Fort Collins. And every Sunday morning, part of the service was to stand and to recite the Apostles' Creed. And that is still going on today, every Sunday. And this is said. Now, this is how Pilate is remembered by that sector of the church. And more. And there's a line in the Apostles' Creed that says, he suffered under Pontius Pilate. That's how Pilate is remembered. Jesus being the one who suffered. In my book, I don't attach Pontius Pilate as the bad guy and we need to blame him. I identify with Pilate and I'm drawn into that reality that I'm part of this same lump that we call humanity. That is the shift in my mind over years of being in this thing of the faith, Christianity. The outcome today for you and I, we saw Pilate. Pilate is remembered from that. When I reach, now this is me personally, when I reach for the valve of self-relief, which I'm learned how to use pretty well in life, I'm actually choosing to become smaller as an individual, because I'm choosing the path of self-deception. When I reach for the valve, relief is overcoming My need for relief is overcoming truth, the truth of what actually exists, and that is self-deception. Personally, I build a narrative in my head that puts me in the center of where I think I need to be. There's a portion of this that's conscious, but most of it is unconscious. In my book, in my world, a lot of it is being right doctrinally. If I can build this self-created narrative where I can put myself in the center of being, the correct individual, I find comfort in that. And that's super unfortunate. Socially, there's a personal aspect and a social aspect of the valve process. Socially, this is so sad, and we see it in our church history, our Protestant church history, protest. Socially, I leave broken relationships and hurt in my wake. Those of us on our call, some of us have been perpetrators, some of us have been receivers. I've done both. I'm guilty. I've left damaged relationships, and I know what it feels like to be on the receiving end. And it's hurt. It forces me to seek, and what it does, because of cognitive dissonance, I can't live in that hurt. I recognize hurt. I feel it. I've seen where I've applied it in a right kind of way. And so what I tend to do is I go to my tribe and I seek reinforcement. Oh, Mike, you're a good guy. You're right. You're standing on the truth and so forth. And yeah, we support you. Well, there's a great aspect of that. We need our tribe, but there's also it can create and perpetuate unhealth and wrong thinking, and that we don't know what happens to Pilate. We're applying it. Well, actually, we do know he gets fired eventually. But we seek reinforcement, and we always go to those that we deem as safe. So I can, and the point of it is just so I can feel better about me. Yes, we are new creations in Christ, is following Jesus, but there's an aspect of being human that I think it would really do us all well to get in touch with. I am so prone to move into these unhealthy ways of thinking, all in the name of doctrinal rightness. And it's created 2,000 years of chaos history. And it's because we are human. Now, here's the table time that we'll move into. The fickle sea of humanity cries out, we want Barabbas. Why? Because we're all made from the same stuff. We don't want Jesus, we want Barabbas. Why? Why do we want Barabbas? Because all humans need deliverance. We need deliverance from what we jointly tend towards. We need a savior. We need deliverance from this. If left to our own devices, the narrative before us is showing what we tend to do to ourselves and to each other. And what was true 2,000 years ago, as recorded in the biblical text, is just as true today. We see it all around us. The unrest, the finger pointing, the violence that we see everywhere. It's what we tend to do and what we need deliverance from. In the pressure of the moment, here's the the line, in the pressure of the moment, whatever that moment is, we humans tend to choose poorly. And to getting in touch with that would be very helpful for all of us as human beings. It might slow us down a bit. Thus is why we need saving from ourselves. And guys, that it would be the key phrase for where we're moving in understanding the cross. Yes, Jesus is the Savior. And who is he saving us from? Ourselves. And that is the point. We see him acting in that regard right here in the text. And that is the movement that we will be looking at. So here's the question, and this is a heavy question, guys. There's probably going to be a lot of silence here. And so feel free to do with it what you wish. You don't have to participate or whatever degree you want to. But let's talk about this idea of pressure. How have I've shared some stories for me just quickly. How have you experienced the feeling of pressure? Um, Job, family, beliefs. And then another follow up question: how have you witnessed from your own life? How have you witnessed the outcome of either your choices or the choices of others? How have you understand the correlation between choices and pressure? And how have you seen this carried out? So anyway, there's some generalized questions to talk about in regard to pressure and choices and outcomes. And so the floor is yours, fellas. We got 20 minutes. So.
Okay.
Well, actually, we all wait for you to talk because we've been all trained
You need
indirectly.
somebody's, yeah,
Explain.
you need
So
someone to start the buffet
yeah,
line
I mean,
moving.
Bill,
Yeah.
you're always so good about responding, and thank you. So,
Well,
what's your thought, Bill?
well, a while back, I did a thing for our church they call Recognition of Souls. And in there, I was talking about how the Bible condemns, especially in Proverbs, strife. And it condemns people who stir up strife. And that sits on one side of the equation. The other side of the equation is I am a people pleaser. And I'm around friends and stuff, and suddenly they get into a conversation, especially politics or religion, that's contrary to me. I don't, I avoid saying or doing things that cause me to risk the loss of friendship or the loss of acceptance into the group. That's my flaw. On the other hand, I look at it says, I also don't like to stir up strife. That's not in the Bible where it condemns strife. It doesn't say you're on the right or wrong side of the argument. It says you're stirring up strife. Stop it. So that's the thing I'm trying to balance when I'm in a crowd.
Yeah, you're raising something that's real in all of our lives. We know that creating strife is not a good thing. That's one side, my hand, and the other side is you know yourself that you want to. I think what you're saying. I don't want to put words in your mouth. That you're willing to accommodate in order to keep the peace. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct, and I have had to wrestle with that a lot.
So I guess first of all, I mean I think that's true of all of our lives. I think we have to challenge our assumptions. What's wrong? Okay, what's wrong with creating strife, and what's wrong with wanting to keep the peace?
Yeah, that's the decision, isn't it? I
It
mean, you go
is.
to I think of the Thanksgiving
And
dinner party with the political fractions around the table, and everybody wants to enjoy themselves, and that somebody will say something that triggers a conversation, and away you go, and
yeah,
you go like, oh, why did you do that?
yeah. If we look at Pilate, he had the same tension right here. He's got this um, governmental authority, this place of privilege and power, but he's also um, he's wanting to keep the peace.
Well, I think he's trying to have the benefit of the doubt because we got to remember that his wife warned him not to have anything to do with this guy.
It's what now?
His wife warned him, don't have anything to
Yeah,
do with this guy.
yeah. That yeah, there that is true. I'm really trying to stay within the text
Right,
of how John depicts it. So, I purposely have not gone there, but that
right.
is true. Yeah. 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 What I'm trying to do is portray it the way John wrote it for us to understand it.
I understand.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, Mike, the word that comes to mind when we're talking about all of this and is expediency. And so my tendency is to do or say whatever is expedient, meaning will end this pressure the quickest, So, and let me give you an example. Um, Too many times you get into a financial difficulty. Um, and then you make a choice, and I don't know if I want to use a little, let's say you've got a problem, you got some bills to pay, so I'm going to take a loan to pay these bills. That's expedient. I get that initial pressure off to get whatever it is paid for that I need to get paid for. But what I didn't realize is I just created a bigger problem because now I've got a high interest loan that is paying off, something that had no interest on it or whatever. And now I'm just pushing it down the road. So I did what was expedient to get the pressure off, but I have created a bigger problem. I think we see this a little bit of what uh, Pilate did
Yep.
here.
That's
Is he
exactly.
was he
Yep.
was doing something expedient, get the crowd off of me, keep me from getting in trouble with Caesar. But in the long run, he's created a bigger problem. And I tend to do that. I make decisions or I say something that will immediately relieve the pressure without thinking about the long-term consequences of whatever decision I'm making. I think that's true for a lot of us.
Yeah, that's so true, Jeff, and it's exactly what's happening. And in one my slide, and that's the whole idea of narrowing our field of vision. We we look for the relief valve of the immediate cash, but we don't read the fine print of its 21% interest
Right.
because I get relief. And that, unfortunately, in a financial sense, is a lot of where we Americans, find ourselves in a consumer world. I owe it to myself, but then I got to pay for this thing.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a financial example of what we're talking about, exactly what Pilate's doing. So he looks for his valve, and his first big ploy here is to get the crowd on Jesus' side to let him go. He's enacting this thing, and it backfires grossly.
Yeah, and I appreciate what the early part of our discussion was today, because I can see it in myself and I can see a Pilate doing it. He's saying, if I give them a choice, then I am not to blame. They are to blame. When it
Right.
all comes down, I can say, well, I gave you a choice and this is what you chose. So and he says this,
I wash my hands.
I washed my hands of this whole thing. You guys made the decision, not me. And we tend to do that, I think, in our lives too, is we give, we ask for somebody's input so that if it doesn't go well, then they get the blame. I don't
Yeah.
get the
Yeah.
Yeah, he washed his hands, but he ended up in the creed anyway.
Yeah, that's true.
Dave, where do you
Yeah,
get
he
these
did.
short,
Yeah.
short,
But
these
we can
short bumper
certainly,
sticker and perfect statements? You know,
yeah.
I think there's one thing I thought I have to bring up is you were talking about the Apostles' Creed and it says he suffered under Pontius Pilate. Is that taken to mean he suffered because of Pontius Pilate, or he suffered while Pontius Pilate was in charge?
Well, Bill, I don't know. As a kid, I know I just I don't know how you think about it, but Jesus suffered under Pontius Pilate. I've always pinned the black hat on Pontius Pilate.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
that's me. I don't, that may be
I
different
just
for you,
I
but
just didn't know if that was locating Jesus in a real time in a real place.
yeah.
Yeah, I think, and we say it in the Episcopal Church too, and I go there with my folks sometimes. It says he suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, dead, and buried. So what I think that's a sequence of events. Pilate ordered him to be beaten and scourged and all that stuff, hoping to alleviate having to go further, but then he also was crucified and then he died and was buried.
Yeah.
So I think that is specifically talking about the suffering that came as a result of Pilate's orders.
That sounds good, Jeff.
Right.
Thanks.
Right.
Yeah.
And the big shift in my mind in that is I don't look at him wearing a black hat anymore. I look at him as a representative of what I have done and will continue to do if I'm left to my own devices. And what we share is that we're human. So it's more of an identification
Mhm.
with it. Yes, it's very meaningful. And I put myself right there in that when reciting that creed. And I would go as far to say that that is not just me. That is really more of the Orthodox view, the long-term history of how Christians identified with that in times past. It's not an us and them; it is a we.
This is a sophomoric example in some regards, and it goes back to actually about 1972. At that time, Betty and I had been married a couple of years, and we were living a block and a half from the mortuary where I was working. So I walked, and on the corner a block down, there was a guy who had a dog, and this was a nasty little dog, and he was always on the loose. So I tried everything, crossing the street, avoiding, all the rest of this, and this dog just kept coming. And I had seen the guy a couple of times and talked to him, can't you. And he says, no, it's not that big a deal. And, he just kind of brushed it off. So the pressure mounts, and other other items are coming to bear in life. So it's not just walking and the dog. And one morning, going back to your deal with him pulling the plugs out of the pressure cooker, the dog was at me and nipping at my heels, and I went up on the guy's porch, and he lived in a house with an original old door, and it was a big plate glass window, in the front door. You
Oh
you all
yeah.
see those. So I'm pounding on the door and end up pounding on the window. I have scars here to show what happened.
Whether you went through the glass.
Put my hands through the glass, uh, cut a tendon, did all
Oh
kinds of
wow.
stuff. So I have to get all this fixed and everything else. So it was a seed planted to learn to control my temper and the pressure in proper ways. And the proper way was eventually what I did was reported the whole situation to the city. And then I'll never forget, sometimes there is justice with a smirk on its face, maybe. because this ended up in front of a municipal judge. It was John Tobin. You remember John Tobin,
Yeah.
Mike?
Yeah.
And so I was there, and the guy that owned the dog was there, and the guy came in and was on. He really apologized. He apologized to the judge and everything else, and the judge was giving him a fine, and he says, "Well, can't really fine. I've got some extra expenses because my dog got hit by a car out in the street, and I have." And Judge Tobin looked at him and said, maybe if you weren't allowing your dog to run around loose without any control, that wouldn't have happened, would it? So he says, I'm not going to relieve the fine. You're responsible for. So I really felt justified, in the whole thing. But I'd been a lot better off if I had taken that course first rather than putting my hand through the plate glass window.
Can
Yeah.
can we put our
So it's very
fingers in this?
sophomoric.
Sorry.
It's very sophomoric, but there's some real lessons later.
Oh, exactly. Thanks, Dave. That's a great story. Yeah.
Yeah, Dave,
Something
can
we
we put
all
our
know.
hands in the fingerprints in your scars?
Yeah, yeah, right. It's- they're not that significant.
Yeah.
Oh,
Um, and kind of keeping it in line with what Bill's been sharing about how other people are feeling. Um, you're well aware of all of you, I think, are well aware of me sharing about it. Me with my racial inferiority complex, which is a result of me kind of wanted to be a pear, as my brother calls a banana. I'm yellow on the inside and white on the inside, yellow on the outside and yellow on the inside.
Yeah.
So I don't think I've ever shared this feeling. Is I was president of a fraternity at Cornell, and they the national fraternity or those fraternities are Southern based, and this one here was one where they kind of were tolerant of Jews. We had a couple of Jewish people in our fraternity, and also they had some. Uh, they were also tolerant of Asians, of which I was the one. So I ended up as the president eventually of that fraternity. And when I was vice president, the president and I were chosen to go to the national meeting and push through a resolution to have local autonomy. In other words, uh, our chapter at Cornell had the uh, the ability or the privilege of actually getting us to be able to accept blacks in our fraternity. Well, here I go with a racial inferior complex to the national. And anyway, we get up there, and the president and I, we were actually no match for them, even though we think we're pretty smart, right? And so they whine, they have guys whine and dine us, and they kind of subtly told us that it's not good to have blacks in the fraternity, okay? And this is why the national has that, and they did it in a very subtle way, and you have all uh, these guys that are older men that are well regarded men and whatever working on us. So anyway, uh, I still remember it was a shameful thing because you could tell when we were presenting it, we were kind of caving into the pressure of the older guys that wanted to keep it free of blacks. So I'll never forget this one guy from Duke, an undergraduate, got up there and kind of looked us in the eyes and said, I'm withdrawing my support of this resolution because I'm looking at these guys, at you that are trying to push it there, and you're not really being truthful in terms of how you're presenting this. You're kind of waffling and whatever. So I'll never forget that. That was a
Wow.
place of shame for me, of having us, we had caved into the pressure, a wrongful pressure, and we had this fellow person
Wow.
from a Southern University telling us we were being hypocrites. Okay.
Wow.
Wow.
Wow, that is
I'll
huge.
never forget that. I mean,
Oh, I guess
this guy
not.
kind of looked me in the eye and looked me and the president in the eye and just, you know, she was telling us, shame, shame, shame. You are yielding to a wrongful pressure.
Wow.
Wow, Totsy, that's
Man,
one.
Tossie, thank you for sharing that with us. Yeah, that's quite a story. Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
I think I like stories where we get tripped up more than stories where we succeed. I learn more from when we get tripped up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, me too. I think we all do. Yeah. Any last comment? Well, fellas, thank you for once again joining in. And this is some pretty heady stuff, but it's pretty personal too. And we're going to continue on with this narrative of Pilate and Jesus. Uh, Hands down, John slows this entire section down. In the synoptic accounts, we don't have near the detail like we do here. We have some other facts that Bill's pointed out, but we'll continue on next week. Yes, I'll be here. So, and we're going to start chapter 19. So that's good news. Have a good week, fellas, and thank you for your participation. And we'll see you. Bye for now.
Right.